Hello, my name is Andrew Bell. We'll be discussing trial and error learning today. The two people that contributed the most in the historical aspect of trial and error learning are Conway Lloyd Morgan and Edward Thorndike. Conway Morgan brought forth the idea of maze learning, which later transformed into trial and error learning. He did this by observing his dog in his cage, trying to open the latch and failing and failing and failing until finally he was able to get out of the cage. When Thorndike read the canon of Morgan, he was inspired by this and started conducting his own research with chicks and cats. For the chicks, he used a simple maze with food at the end as the stimulus or the reward at the end for figuring it out. For the cats, he used puzzle boxes. One of his most well-known puzzle boxes included 3 steps that the cat had to complete in order to get out and receive the reward. Now that we know a very base of who the two people are that contributed the most to this theory in the historical perspective, what is trial and error learning? Trial and error learning is learning from the wrong answer. It is trying and trying and trying and failing until you finally do come up with the correct response for the question that's at hand. The paper, The Problem of Learning, says it is an ability to see the problem and to deal successfully with the situation is considered by the trial and error theory to be something which is developed in the subject in the course of the random responses it makes to the situation. It also strengthens good connections. Through the paper Mistakes and Stepping Stones, Effects and Errors of Episodic Memory Among Young and Older Adults, through the study they conducted, it proved that through trial and error learning and not errorless learning, the good connections in the brain were strengthened and the bad or weak connections between the question and the correct response were weakened and done away with. In the historical perspective of the puzzle boxes, this was done simply by the cat being in the puzzle box and it wanted to get out because it was in a foreign environment. It was stressed, it wanted relief, it wanted out of that box. That is what gave it the motivation to try until it did come up with the correct answer. Now that we understand this, we can move on to the next, which is discussing the paper The Problem of Learning. This paper was written in 1923 and it was comparing the trial and learning to the Gestalt style of learning. The Gestalt style of learning was very insight oriented and was based off the research of Kohler with the gorillas, And in comparison, trial and error was very much the hottest thing in America at the time, and the 4 people that were very much pro-Gestalt, the writer of this paper, Lawrence K. Frank, being one of them, was trying to show Gestalt learning in a very positive light. I believe this shows very well the competition in the early 1900s for these two learning theories, as we were very much still trying to figure out how we learn from Pavlov and classical conditioning and operant conditioning to now more complicated theories of learning. One of the main points of trial and error learning is the fact that it views the world as a very sequential place. If you do one thing, there's this consequence and there's this consequence. If you do not accept the premise that the world is very situational, then trial and error learning has no foundation. 2015, and it was on the basis of comparing errorless learning and trial and error learning in 65 younger participants whose mean age was 22 and 64 older participants whose mean age was 77. Now, upon organizing these two groups of older and younger participants, they then split them into two different groups through concise and lectural conditioning. They had 32 in each of the younger and 32 of each in the older. They made sure before conducting this study on the 128 participants that each participant was free from any major health conditions affecting cognition, and they also administered a modified telephone interview cognitive screening, and the cutoff for that had to be 30 out of 40. The process which they used to conduct this study was for the errorless and trial and error learning conditions. Participants were instructed to commit to memory the correct target words for a later memory test. In the trial and error conditions, the experimenter always selected a target word that was not generated as a guess by the participant. For the errorless portion of the study, each participant was shown a word stem at the top of the screen, and followed by it under it the target word. The results of the study showed on the conceptual condition, trial and error learning was 20 points higher on the younger group than the errorless learning. On the older group, trial and error learning was up 15 points than the errorless learning. This showed that it is not only youth and age that affects cognition and memory as well as learning, but also the style. For the lectural conditioning, errorless learning was higher in both the younger and older group, which also shows the style of asking the question contributes to whether or not the participants will be able to remember the answer. Now that we have an understanding of how this study was conducted, let's summarize. The results of the trial and error showed more effective in conceptual conditioning. This shows that remembering conceptual errors can help with retrieval and act as stepping stones so that eventually you can come out with the correct response. In the lectural conditioning, errorless was more effective simply because of the style. In summarization on implications of learning, this shows that when a teacher walks into a classroom and is about to introduce a new concept, those 15 minutes where they put something up on the board and the children are just simply guessing, inputs more into their memory, does more for them to help them grasp and understand the concept for later testing than anything else. Because having these false answers and these wrong answers do act as stepping stones for the memory and will later help them retrieve the information when they go to be tested over it. Thank you. I hope this information was helpful as well as enjoyable.